Researchers say raccoons are on track to be domesticated.
We're all very excited to see that urban raccoons have shorter snouts than rural ones, which might indicate that they're on the pathway to domestication.
I learned this morning that raccoons are trying to domesticate themselves. I just want to know, is there an early access program?
Raccoons are not evolving to become domesticated. That study was wrong.
This is a very serious article. But us besties existing in everyday life, we heard blah blah blah, we can have pet raccoons. Hey guys, it's Briar, and let's chat about it. Permission to have a silly one, because there is drama in the raccoon research community. Because recently a study came out that concluded that raccoons are in the early stages of domestication. And well, maybe you saw that the internet went bananas, B-A-N-A-N-A-S, because we heard raccoons are becoming domesticated, and the internet was beyond excited at the thought of another furry friend becoming a possible pet. And while of course it feels like it's human nature when we see something cute and furry and has silly little hands, like, yeah, there's something within us, within a here or here somewhere, that makes us really just want one. I want one. But well, as I said, there is drama in the raccoon research community because, as the wise Dr. Alex Russo once said, everything is not as it seems, and it may appear that this research just gave us false hope, got us all excited for nothing. And well, when I saw all the hoopla and the drama, you know, a yapper had to yap about it. So if you guys just want to have a silly one, hang out and chat about this research and everything that went down because of it, in of course the most unscientific, just a bestie pop way possible, yeah, stick around and let's get into it. So as I said, not a scientist, shock horror to probably no one. I'm not secretly a zoologist, biologist, any sort of ologist really. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so all I'm really good at is being open to all answers and not certain of any. And so obviously off the bat we have to clarify that just a bestie, just an every schmeveryday person reacting to this news and trying to decipher it in my own silly and goofy way. And I feel like we can do it together. And if any of you besties out there are secretly or not so secretly biologists, zoologist, animalologist, raccoonologist, would love your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, because obviously we're just laymen's, mins of the lay, trying to figure this all out and trying to figure out, are raccoons becoming domesticated? Are they not? Like, please, can we have an answer? They're so cute, they're so fluffy, I want to die. And to quote the iconic movie Over the Hedge, I don't care if these things are against the Geneva Convention, I want it. And I feel like there is definitely this very like visceral reaction that humans, us the people, have to raccoons. We find them very cute. There's something very like within humans. We just wants it. We wants to believe that there is a reality where raccoons would enjoy being our pets, where raccoons would want to be our pets. And when research like this comes out, it gets everyone a little bit silly and excited. And well, as someone who lives in a country where we do not have raccoons, and the first time I met one was actually, well, I didn't meet it, I saw it from afar, was when I worked at a summer camp in America, and I specifically and distinctly remember the do not touch, do not feed rules, because, you know, it's kind of like in New Zealand, we tell people not to feed the birds on the beach because otherwise you will never be able to eat on the beach in peace. Do not interact with the raccoons. Yes, they're cute, yes, they're fluffy, but do not interact with them. And there's always been kind of, I guess, this understanding that whilst yes, due to the over the hedgeification of raccoons' environments and of them, you know, kind of us kind of existing, you know, in somewhat of a proximity to each other, the rabies of it all, the kind of bites when scared of it all, relatable. The fact that raccoons are very smart but also very destructive, and so that therefore makes them not very good pets, like all of that has always existed in the background and in the kind of conclusion of, yeah, as much as we find them cute and adorable and, you know, it's silly when they go through the bins, trash, rubbish, trash can? I don't know what you guys call them. But I feel like there's always all of that going on. And as I understand, in certain parts of America, you can actually have a raccoon as a pet, but that does not mean that raccoons themselves are domesticated, because as I understand it, domestication is like a multi-generational situational thing. That is kind of an isolated raccoon event. We're not then taking those raccoons that have become someone's pet for one reason and or another, and then like breeding them and also, domesticating their babies, things like that. But that's kind of the blah blah blahs of raccoons, as the alleged movie, in my mind, documentary Over the Hedge kind of displays this when to become one of the environment of animals like raccoons. That does leave us with these types of questions. Is this somehow creating a mutually beneficial relationship between animals like that and us? Like, is there a world where they would eventually want to be our pets? And so I guess that's kind of what inspired this article that kicked all of this off anyway. And well, as most scientific articles are, this one is not got the most spiciest or like zestiest headline. I feel like a scientific article is like the antithesis of a YouTube video title. Very wordy, not very clickbaity, because the article was called Tracking Domestication Signals Across Populations of North American Raccoons. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce the scientific name, via citizen science-driven image repositories. And this was published in October of this year. So it did take it a little bit of a minute to get the traction and to get everyone chattering about it. But basically a team of like scientists, and this is, a zoology paper, did a study on raccoons and are they showing signs of raccoon domestication, a la the over the hedgeification of their environment, a la, more interaction, blah, blah, blah. But if we go to the conclusion of it all, in this paper, we find that raccoons in close contact with densely populated human environments experience a reduction in snout length. Our data supports the mechanistic hypothesis and illustrates the potential of raccoons as a new model species to study the effects of early domestication processes. We also highlight the importance of considering that selection pressures associated with domestication events do not exist in a vacuum, but interact with other environmental selection pressures. So basically, maybe they were also inspired by the movie, the iconic banger that was Over the Hedge, and were trying to figure out, is this actually leading to domestication? And their kind of findings were, well, yes, we do feel that way. Well, yes, there does seem to be promising signs here due to snout length, and that will become important later because it is a big part of the research raccoon debate drama, the snout length, the way that they've come to this conclusion, blah blah blah, things like that. But as I'm sure you can imagine, this is a very, scientific, it was published by a university, like very serious article. But us besties existing in everyday life, we heard blah blah blah, we can have pet raccoons, and the media and social media especially just got so jazzed, boots excited. But so let's watch a couple of news articles talking about the situation and talking about the study in more detail that ultimately went very viral and kind of took this study from being like, just another scientific paper and made it viral news to the point where the internet was gooped in gags. Jaws were on the floor. People were so excited.
Researchers say raccoons are on track to be domesticated. The study used raccoons as models to determine whether long-term exposure to humans and human environments could lead to domestication, or more specifically, domestication syndrome. Domestication syndrome refers to the observable physical traits that emerge in animals undergoing domestication, typically including features such as shorter snouts, floppier ears, smaller brains, and reduced aggression when compared to their wild counterparts. The study argues that domestication is often misunderstood as a process imposed on animals by humans, a view that researchers say could not be more inaccurate. Instead, they propose that domestication begins when a subpopulation of animals inhabits niche human environments that provide advantages such as readily available food and the absence of large predators. Researchers analyzed nearly 20,000 photos of raccoons from a crowdsourced database of natural specimen images. All photos were taken in the United States between 2000 and 2024. 2004, the scientists focused on snout and skull length measurements to identify potential signs of domestication syndrome. They found that the raccoons living in close contact with densely populated human environments did indeed show a reduction in snout length. This, they conclude, highlight the potential for raccoons to serve as a new model species to study the effects of early-stage domestication processes.
These comments got so excited. A lot of people saying like, okay, tell them to speed it up. They did missing themselves the way that cats did. First good news I've had in weeks. And I feel like that comment definitely would be, to me at least, one of the reasons why this got so viral. It's a stressful time. I mean, I've said it a few times. The end of the year is stressful already. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the world, the news, and it's just a stressful time of year. And I feel like that has definitely played into at least part why this news went so viral, because people were like, finally, some good news, some exciting news that doesn't make me want to cry, maybe a tear or two of joy, but news that is not upsetting to hear. And I do think things like this, people really enjoy having a little bit of good news. People really felt like they needed a little bit of good news, a little bit of a reprieve from the scary, overwhelming, not just even news, but stress that people have in their lives. So I feel like that comment that was like, finally, the first good news I've heard in weeks, is like a sentiment that definitely explains why, at least in part, that this study and this news went so viral. So now let's watch another news article that also explains further the study that also went very viral.
Raccoons are basically the prime model to look at how interactions with humans is changing animals. And my background in research is on domestication, so dogs, cats, and all that. And I was curious to see, like, do we have an animal nowadays that might be going through those similar stages of domestication? And we decided to have a look at raccoons and looked at close to 20,000 images across the United States, and wanted to see if raccoons that live in close proximity to humans, so in urban environments, would show signs of domestication, and compared to the rural companions, to the rural counterparts. And one such trait that domesticated animals usually show is a snout reduction. And we were all very excited to see that actually, indeed, urban raccoons have shorter snouts than rural ones, which might indicate that they're on the pathway to domestication.
So that was a video from Rafaela, who is one of the people in the research study, and that video has over 6 million views on TikTok. And well, as I'm sure you can imagine, the comments went crazy bananas. This top comment says they just want a soft life. So you're telling me there's a chance that I could have a pet raccoon? Raccoons have been trying so hard to domesticate themselves, lol. As you can see, the hype was there. People were so excited at the thought of having a pet raccoon and of this study being true, and of this study really showing and having this kind of evidence that we could, in some reality, in some universe, in some near and or distant future, have pet raccoons. But now let's watch a couple of people's videos reacting to the situation and just being so excited.
I learned this morning that raccoons are trying to domesticate themselves. I just want to know, is there an early access program? Is there something like an upside down pineapple that will signal that I'm open to such a relationship? I also learned that they're trying to shorten their snouts so that they're cuter to humans. And I don't want to be a pick-me, but you're pretty cute already. So maybe me first?
I am taking it home with me. Home with me. And there is nothing you can do to stop me.
We need to domesticate raccoons. We need to domesticate them, and then we need to train them to use their tiny little raccoon hands to do our dishes. And the only thing that's stopping us is our own cowardice.
As you can see from the comments and the videos, oh, us laymen were excited. Oh, just the general population that aren't zoologists, that aren't, in the weeds of what the snout reduction actually means, of correlative versus causative research, of what you can actually conclude from analyzing photos. Like, we were so excited. Don't bog us down with the details. Don't say, well, actually, this study is only showing correlative research and you can't actually conclude anything causative because of it. Shush! We don't want to hear it. We don't care. I feel like that is the general reaction to any sort of person being like, I hate to break it to you, but this is not exactly a kind of study that we can use to say this is causing this. This is definitely a study, as we kind of heard and learned, that is using photos over time and analyzing those photos. It's very much something that could be used to further along studies and look into, can we find if this is causing it, or is there just a correlation here? Is there a third reason over here that is actually the actual root cause? And I feel like, I can't remember what the website is called, but psychology kids and students and just people in general love this silly website because it shows you like weird, completely non-related two things that have a very high correlative association. So the official term for it is spurious correlation, which is things that have a very high correlation, but in actuality, it's like a complete coincidence. It's a complete accident. Like someone call Sabrina Carpenter because it's just a coincidence. There is like a certain percentage or, amount that science and psychology has deemed as like, this is more than chance. This is higher likelihood than it just being randomly correlated. But people over the years have found like random things that have a super high correlation. So this one, for example, divorce rates in Maine and per capita consumption of margarine. And I think these things are really interesting because it does challenge this idea that, if these things are correlated, that they actually have a relationship, but you can actually have things that correlate, like the divorce rates in the margarine have a correlation of 99.26%. So way above what is considered random or R. But why am I going on this tangent about correlation and causation? Why am I raining on everyone's parade? Why am I not just letting everyone rejoice in the idea that raccoons are becoming domesticated? And well, that's because people that are smarter than me and in the field of raccoon research actually had to come out and challenge this research and challenge what people are concluding from it, because unfortunately, even though as much as we want this to be true, just because we want something to be true doesn't mean it is. And just because there has been correlative research found, just because there have been studies that has found some sort of relationship between these data points, doesn't actually mean that there's a causation relationship here, doesn't actually mean, unfortunately, that raccoons are becoming domesticated. So I am unfortunately going to have to rain on everyone's parade, but that is the story that is here at play, and that's seemingly the reality of this study. So let's watch a couple of people's videos explaining perhaps why, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, and the potential flaws of this study.
You may have heard the recent news that North America's raccoons seem to be domesticating themselves. In the paper, they argue that basically like we think cats domesticated themselves, some raccoons are choosing to live in close proximity to people because they can find more food there. And while they are doing that, they are evolving to be less fearful of people. And that's where this comes in right here. They were looking at the snout size of these raccoons in the photographs. And these researchers were focusing on the snout length because of something called the neural crest hypothesis. If you're familiar with the Russian silver fox domestication experiment, this ties into that. The hypothesis basically suggests that if you select for reduced fear and tameness, you're altering the development of neural crest cells. And those cells, they're associated with building parts of the skull, the ears, teeth. They're associated with pigmentation and adrenal glands. So by changing them, you're going to produce a predictable suite of traits, and that's what they call domestication syndrome. Some of these hypotheses, they are more valid than others. Not every paper that gets published is equal. And when we look at this raccoon paper, they are simply discussing a correlation with snout size and urban and rural raccoons from a very small sample size.
And so you see, Your Honor, and so you see, my dear bestie chattinators, that is why I went on a random tangent about correlation. The reality of this study is correlative, not causation. Correlation versus causation. It's like I'm being thrown back in time to Psychology 101. Like, that is truly one of the fundamental basic things that you get taught in psychology. That, and don't use this information to diagnose yourself. But those two things are like the things that they're like, okay, before we get started. Correlation versus causation, and don't use this information to diagnose yourself or people around you. But let's continue watching this video.
So while a lot of these headlines are junk, Clay Travis, this one right here actually got it pretty good. Urban raccoons show early signs of domestication. Because that's what the paper found. One signal that could be an early indicator that an animal is going through this domestication process, which even in this case, domestication doesn't feel like the right word. It would more just be like raccoons adapting and evolving to live in the environment that we have created. I don't really like confusing that with domestication the way we think of domesticated animals, and you can see a lot of those headlines were doing that.
And I do feel like this raccoon study is a pretty good example of what we do see happen a lot with science when it gets translated to the news, to social media. It takes, like what I said, a very sterile, wordy article and turns it into what news is supposed to be and what a lot of social media news turns into, and that is clickbait, excitement. And along the way, the message gets changed, and along the way, we have the blah, blah, blah. We can have a pet raccoon hopefully soon. The colloquialization of what the study is saying actually turned it into something that it wasn't really saying in the first place. But let's just watch the rest of his video.
This data is collected from citizen scientists that are taking photographs of raccoons. And where are people more likely to photograph raccoons? Probably pretty close to where people are at. They're probably not going deep into the woods to get pictures of raccoons. So really, the whole study just seems flawed. Maybe raccoons are showing early signs of domestication, but this study certainly doesn't prove it, and the authors weren't trying to claim it proved it either. It's basically just an interesting starting point others could try to expand on, but it's the headlines. The headlines really kind of take it and run with it.
So what does this mean? Do we blame the translation into clickbait news articles the reason that it got so wrong? Because as even this creator said, like, those scientists weren't trying to say that raccoons are domesticated either, but that's what it got turned into. And even those scientists themselves said they want to use this type of study and data to then move on to more in-depth research. And I think the thing is, and the boring truth and the unclickbaity truth and the unfun truth of it all, is that you need research or an article or some sort of study like this to be able to justify saying, hey, we want to, trap or test or more closely observe raccoons and do something that's more invasive to them and their lifestyle. You need research to justify that. You can't just be like, I don't know, I think I'm just gonna follow the raccoons around. Like, you, as a scientist, there's ethics, there is rules, there is regulations. This isn't the 19 whatevers when we were just, giving people psychedelics or whatever the freak frack front and back they used to do back in the day. But anyway, let's now watch the raccoon experts video explaining it all, debunking it all, and unfortunately telling us the sad truth that we're not going to be getting pet raccoons anytime soon.
Raccoons are not evolving to become domesticated. That study was wrong. And I am telling you this as an actual raccoon biologist. This study, which has been referenced all over the internet recently, is fundamentally flawed. To start off with, the basis of the study as a whole is based on another flawed study, Belaev's Russian silver domestic fox study, where it is claimed that over the course of 50 years, foxes from the wild were able to be domesticated, evolving shorter snouts and floppy ears and lighter pigmentation and a friendlier attitude, and curlier tails. Except these foxes weren't from the wild. They were from fur farms on Prince Edward Island in Canada. They were a heavily inbred population. The vast majority of the genetic changes that occurred in Belaev's study occurred in the foxes while they were on the fur farm. And this domestication study that he did is the only existing study in the world that proves this hypothesis. Did y'all know that he had other failed studies that didn't prove what he was trying to say, including one with otters? Now, there are other videos about this experiment that you can watch in my Animal Facts playlist, because I want to get on to the most concerning part of the study.
And I feel like it is an important time to note that this is a huge issue with that study being used for the raccoon study, because, what's the word? Replicability. Being able to repeat a study is important to show reliability and validity. I'm just using all of my psychology words, guys. I think that is such an interesting thing to point out, is that the study that was used for this study in itself is potentially very flawed and isn't able to be replicated, and yet now they're using that information for the study to then validate a potentially flawed study. Oh my gosh, the drama of it all. And I feel like this is what, like, I got really interested and went down the rabbit holes of it all. Raccoon holes. Do raccoons have holes? That sounded wrong. Do raccoons dig holes? Oh, they do. Fun. Okay, so I went down a few raccoon holes. I think it's so interesting when you see this kind of back and forth between different experts in these fields of people being able to use a different study and saying, this is how we're going to do our study, and then someone else coming in and saying, hey, you're using a flawed study to validate your own research. What the deal with that? And I'm just like, the drama of it all. Was I really bad at biology? Well, yes. Was science always my weak point? Of course it was. But the drama at scale over raccoons because we wish they would be pets? Oh, it's crazy. But anyway, let's keep watching her video.
Because the authors were so focused on trying to find proof of raccoons showing that they're being domesticated, they didn't realize that they accidentally rediscovered raccoon subspecies. Let's look at the data. This is the actual data. This was the code used to process the data. A little sussy that R is apparently showing ways to change the data percentage. But who am I? Anyway, overall they ended up using data from 28 rural raccoons and 144 urban raccoons. Can you see the problem yet? No? Let's keep going. So I downloaded the data, put it into only the years they were using, and using maps and studies on raccoon biology, I assigned each raccoon their relevant subspecies. This highlighted area, by the way, is because they assigned downtown Pigeon Forge as rural. That's a major tourism hotspot where I research. Those are urban raccoons. Anyways, using the exact same method that the study used for calculating differences in rural to urban skull-snout ratios, I calculated the differences in subspecies. But as you can see, the California raccoon has a ratio that is 5.26% smaller than all the other subspecies, and the Pacific Northwest raccoon is over 2% bigger. And this does align with the actual morphological descriptions of each subspecies. Because yes, some do have shorter snouts. It's for dietary reasons. So here are the different breakdowns. About 12.5% of the raccoons in the urban populations have a snout size that is 5.26% less than the other subspecies. And the Upper Mississippi Valley raccoon and the Pacific Northwest raccoon, with the two largest differences respectively, make up over 8% for urban and 21% here, and then 4.2% and 10.7%. There is such a disparity here because they used iNaturalist data. These are average, everyday citizens taking pictures of raccoons that they see, not people going out into the woods to look for raccoons. So we're only seeing the data on what's easiest to photograph. None of this has anything to do with domestication.
Sorry, I have to pick my jaw up off the floor. I can't believe it. I mean, it makes sense that, she's an expert in raccoons and she was able to pretty quickly debunk the data. But it's just like, wow, the drama is crazy. It is at scale. And as someone who is not in the field at all, you can't help but wonder the drama dynamics within the raccoon and biology space of her coming out to explicitly say this study is garbage. She was so easily able to break down why the study was not actually reliable or valid and just really call out the study in the first place. And you're just sitting here so I can't have a pet raccoon? And I feel like these top comments really just surmise the whole situation, where the top comment is really just have you considered that I want it to be true? And then things are heating up in the raccoon biologist sphere. And I feel like those really just both encapsulate the biggest reactions of, I think people wanted this study to be true because A, cute, but B, we wanted that lighthearted news story relief. We wanted something fun and silly, and we wanted some hope for the future even, some hope that we could have a cute raccoon pet and it would want to be our pet. We're not forcing them to hang out with us. Unfortunately, it didn't take much for her to not just completely derail the study, but for her to point out the studies used for the basis of the study were not reliable, for the fact that the way they collected the data was not reliable, the ratio of data was not reliable, the way the data was collected was not reliable because it was based on the people, us silly besties who like raccoons and take pictures of them. There were so many ways in which it was an unreliable study, unfortunately. And so even if perhaps it's possible, or there is some sort of mutual relationship being built between us and raccoons, as, we start to share an environment in a space. Unfortunately, it seems like from what she is saying that the study doesn't prove it one way or another because it's just not reliable. But to just go through a couple of other comments, it's just like, no, don't say that. Can I just pet one? Have you considered nuh-uh? I absolutely love you dug into this and hope you submit to a journal. And she says that as a plan. So it's really getting dramatic out here. She is literally going to submit this kind of counter analysis of the data. This is a terrific example of how much flawed research is out there in the world, which I think is really sad because it does just make it harder for people like this and like for other studies. Like us as people, we don't know. We're not raccoon experts. We're not biologists. All I know is the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We are kind of relying on these experts to be using reliable studies and providing reliable research with reliable outcomes. And when things like this happen, it just makes it seem like, well, whomst are we to believe? But then there's also this comment that says, what is the obsession with wild animals domesticating themselves? I feel like 1, this would take way longer than it's been talked about, and 2, I feel like it kind of ignores how wild animals are surviving in urban environments. And she replies saying it also ignores cultures, specifically indigenous cultures. Indigenous people lived alongside raccoons for thousands of years and never domesticated them because there was no need to. Llamas, alpacas, guinea pigs, and turkeys were all domesticated in places where raccoons are found. So just like the plot doth thicken, and the fact that raccoons, like, it's not new for them to be living alongside us. It's not new for them to be sharing an environment with us. Like, yes, now we have trash cans and, they might wake up from hibernation and there's a whole suburbia that's been built where they once, frolicked through a forest. But as far as this being new to them, no. They've seen this film before and they didn't get domesticated, unfortunately. And then this comment that says, thank you, I was pretty enraged when I saw this. It's super irresponsible for people to be claiming that raccoons are domesticating themselves. All you're doing is basically encouraging people to interact inappropriately with wild animals, putting them both themselves and the animals at serious risk. And I feel like that is, the truth of it all. And it, reminds me of, when that clip of Travis Kelce went viral of him saying, he would love to save an otter. And it's like, we can love and think that these wild animals are cute, but he obviously acknowledges that the reason he doesn't have an otter or hasn't got a pet otter is because there's the acknowledgement that these are wild animals. And even if we have interactions, or even if there are people that, seemingly have a pet raccoon and it's happy, I can't comment, I don't know how that works, but the overall acknowledgement is that these are wild animals and we're not entitled to them being our pets, and we're not entitled to interact with them or to disturb them more. And to take it back to when I went to the summer camp, that's why the overall message with raccoons is don't touchy, they can bite you, they may have rabies. We don't want to interact with them. We should leave them alone. They're wild animals. That is the ultimate message. And I feel like, it doesn't mean that we can't find them cute. It doesn't mean that we can't enjoy cute pictures and videos of raccoons. And so ultimately that study going viral just kind of creates a confusion and a misinformation around what the reality is that is happening here with humans and raccoons and the kind of relationship that may exist. And I feel like truly most people get it. Like these comments that say, listen, I'm not doubting your facts, I'm just emotionally unprepared to accept the fact I'll never probably have a pet raccoon, or I'm conflicted because on one hand I love ecology, but on the other hand you've ruined my fantasy of a pet raccoon for me. And I think it is just people accepting the fact that unfortunately that study was too good to be true, and that study may have got turned into inferring causation or some sort of belief that we are one step closer to having pet raccoons, when in reality we can't really take much, if anything, away from that study. And I do think it's interesting that this study was published, because it does seem like the study was published so that they could go on to do further research. Because from that first video that we watched with one of the researchers, she said that she'd love to take the next steps and see if our trash pandas in our backyards are really friendlier than those out in the countryside. And so I think it's very clear that this study for them was their first step to be able to study raccoons more intensively to see if they are domesticating themselves, if their behaviors are changing, you can't help just worry, like, is what Nessie said true? It's like the blinders are on. The goal of raccoons becoming domesticated was so the single focus that so much was ignored, and it turned into just like a one-tracked mind and a one-track study to then be able to do more studies like it. And that isn't really like the goal of science. That isn't really the goal of a study. When you're doing research, you're not trying to prove that you're right or that the thing you want to be true is true. You're trying to find something out. You're trying to find out more than what we already know. And I think in this case, it does seem like what they wanted to be true maybe did unfortunately affect the overall study, allegedly, in my unprofessional opinion. It's the biggest flaw about science and studies and psychology and all of that, is that it's run by us goofy goobers, human beings, and we have bias, and sometimes that bias is wishing that we could have a pet raccoon, or hoping that, you know, urban raccoons are becoming friendly so their cute little fingers can, you know, go around a hand, you know. But unfortunately, just because we want it to be true doesn't mean it is. But I really just wanted to kind of chat about that with you guys, because I just was like, it's kind of different. It's something a little bit different, and like an interesting story and an interesting like example of what happens a lot with science getting translated into social media and pop culture and like clickbait headlines, but also just the crazy drama that was the study even something that was valid or repeatable or reliable in the first place? And sometimes I just want to talk about something silly. As I want to do, I talked about something silly. But I would love to know you guys' thoughts in the comments down below, so please let me know if any of you guys are in the science field, in the zoology, biology, raccoon field. I would love to know your thoughts. So I would love to know you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. You guys always have such great ones, so please do let me know in the comments down below. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching. If you stay till the end, you are a real one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to keep up with me between my uploads, I'm on TikTok and Instagram, and I'll link my vlog channel down below. I'm doing Vlogmas on my vlog channel, so there will be 12 vlogs in the month of December. And if you did not know already, we're also doing Chatmas on this channel, so there'll be 12 main channel videos in the month of December, hopefully in the lead up to Christmas, but if not, 12 videos in December. Lots of videos, lots of vlogs. So if you like that stuff, please subscribe, please like, and I appreciate that all so much. And I forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah, my vlog channel down below, but also YouTube should be recommending another one of my videos on the screen right now. But don't you worry guys, because I'm not funny there either. Bye.